The meeting room was large, with walls covered in expensive wood panels and long curtains that blocked out the sunlight. Around the polished table sat men and women in dark suits, all holding thick folders and digital tablets. Their faces were tight, serious, and full of stress. This was no ordinary meeting. The company had been struggling for months. Profits were falling, employees were unhappy, and rumors of corruption were spreading quietly in the lower offices. But here, in the high tower where decisions were made, the leaders believed they were untouchable. At the head of the table sat Mr. Thompson, the senior executive. He wore a sharp gray suit, his tie the color of blood, and his voice was the loudest in the room. He slammed his hand against the table, demanding results, demanding answers, demanding loyalty. Around him, others nodded, afraid to speak against him. The tension in the room was heavy until the door creaked open. Everyone turned. And there she was. An old black janitor, wearing her green uniform and a simple cap, stood in the doorway. She carried a mop bucket in one hand and pushed a small cart with cleaning bottles and rags. Her shoes squeaked softly against the polished floor. Her face was calm, but her eyes held a strength that no one in the room could ignore. For a moment, silence hung over the meeting. Then, as if on cue, the laughter began. "Wrong room, old lady," one of the younger managers sneered. "You don't belong here," shouted Mr. Thompson, pointing a sharp finger at her as if she had committed a crime. The janitor didn't flinch. She didn't apologize or hurry out. Instead, she stepped further inside, pushing her cart gently to the side. She folded her arms across her chest and stood tall, her back straight like a soldier. The people in suits exchanged confused glances. Some laughed again, others rolled their eyes. A woman whispered, "She's just here to clean. Why doesn't she leave?" But the janitor's silence was louder than their mockery. "Did you not hear me?" Mr. Thompson barked, his face red. "This is a private meeting. You are not welcome here. Get out before I call security." Still, she didn't move. Instead, she let her gaze travel slowly across the room, her eyes meeting each executive one by one. Some shifted uncomfortably under her calm stare. It was as if she could see through their expensive suits and straight postures, straight into their guilty hearts. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was low, but steady. "I've worked in this building longer than most of you have worn those suits," she said. "And today I'm not here to clean your floors, I'm here to clean the truth." Gasps filled the room. Some laughed again, thinking it was a joke. But there was something in her tone, something so firm, so unshakable, that it silenced the laughter quickly. One arrogant man leaned back in his chair, smirking. "I own you," he said, his voice dripping with superiority. "Don't forget your place." The janitor turned her head slowly, her eyes narrowing on him. "No," she replied, calm but sharp as a blade. "You don't own me, but I do own something that belongs to all of you, the truth." Her words sent a ripple of unease across the room. Behind her, the cleaning cart stood like a quiet witness, but inside her worn leather bag, hidden under a folded rag, were papers and files that no one expected. Evidence. Proof. Years of careful notes, copies of emails, secret documents she had gathered while silently moving through the hallways and offices that others thought she was too invisible to notice, but she had noticed. She had seen everything. For years, while sweeping floors and emptying trash bins, she had overheard conversations, watched documents being shredded, and read discarded reports left carelessly in bins. No one ever suspected the janitor. No one ever thought she mattered. That invisibility became her power. Now, standing before the highest leaders of the company, she was ready to use that power. But instead of rushing, she let the silence grow. She wanted them to feel it, the slow rising fear that they were no longer in control. Mr. Thompson tried to regain control of the room. "Enough," he shouted. "This woman is insane. Someone get her out." Yet no one moved, not even the guards, standing at the door. Something in her confidence stopped them. She took another step forward. "For years you have stolen from your workers," she said, her words clear and cutting. "You've hidden money, cut corners, and destroyed lives. And all the while you believed no one was watching. But I was watching. I was always watching. Wham. Executives shifted uncomfortably. Whispers ran across the table. A few faces turned pale. One younger board member who had never spoken up before leaned forward and asked, almost in a whisper, "What proof do you have?" The janitor's lips curved into a faint smile. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick brown envelope. She placed it on the table with a firm hand. The sound echoed in the silent room. "That," she said softly, "is proof. Pages of it. Every lie you told, every dollar you stole, every deal you hid." No one laughed now. For the first time, the powerful men and women in the room looked powerless. Their polished shoes tapped nervously against the floor. Their perfect postures slouched. The old janitor, who they believed was nothing, had turned into the most powerful person in the building, and this was just the beginning. The heavy silence in the room didn't last long. Laughter broke through again, louder this time, but it was the kind of laughter that comes from fear disguised as confidence. The executives couldn't allow themselves to look weak, not in front of each other and certainly not in front of a janitor. One man leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his legs with arrogance. His name was Richard, the finance director. He had built a reputation on cutting costs and finding savings in places where workers suffered the most. He smirked at the janitor, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "This is ridiculous," Richard said. "Are we seriously letting the cleaning lady interrupt an important meeting? What's next? Will the delivery guy run the company?" The others chuckled, though uneasily. "She doesn't know what she's talking about," another executive chimed in, adjusting his gold watch. "She's here to polish floors, not tell us how to run millions in assets." The janitor stood her ground, arms still folded across her chest. She didn't react to their insults. Her silence irritated them even more. "Answer me," Richard snapped. "What gives you the right to stand here?" Finally, she spoke, her calm tone cutting through their noise. "The truth gives me the right, and the truth does not care about your titles or your suits." The room stirred again. Some rolled their eyes, others smirked, but a few shifted uncomfortably in their seats. For the first time, they felt the strange sense that she wasn't bluffing. "Truth?" scoffed Mr. Thompson, the senior executive. He slammed his hand against the table again. "You are nothing here. You hear me? Nothing. You clean our trash, you scrub our toilets, that's all you are, and that's all you'll ever be." The words were sharp and cruel, echoing across the polished walls. But the janitor didn't flinch. Instead, she let a small, knowing smile appear on her face. "Funny," she said softly, "how a person who scrubs your toilets knows more about your secrets than you do about her." The room froze. The younger manager from earlier, eager to prove his loyalty to Thompson, jumped in with even more arrogance. "Lady, don't play games here. We own you. This company owns you. Without us, you'd be nothing but a nameless cleaner in the street." At that moment, the janitor's eyes met his. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm gaze pierced through his pride. "No," she said, each word deliberate. "You do not own me, but I own something you can never take back. Knowledge." A nervous chuckle escaped from someone at the table, but it quickly died. There was something unsettling in the way she said it. Something final. The janitor then stepped closer to the table, her shoes squeaking lightly on the floor. She rested her hand on the envelope she had placed earlier. Her fingers tapped gently on it, as if reminding them that the truth was within reach. "Do you think your workers don't notice when their paychecks shrink?" she asked, her voice steady. "Do you think they don't realize when their health benefits disappear? When promises of safety are broken? When families are left struggling while you drive home in new cars?" Her words were like arrows, each finding its mark. Some of the executives shifted, others looked down at their tablets as if hoping to escape her gaze. Richard, refusing to lose control, burst into laughter again. "What are you even talking about? These are baseless accusations. Lies from an old woman desperate for attention." The janitor tilted her head slightly, her eyes still on him. "If they're lies," she said calmly, "then why does your face turn pale when I speak them?" The room went quiet again. Behind the mockery, behind the arrogance, fear was beginning to grow. They could hear it in the silence, feel it in the weight of her words. For years, the executives had believed they were safe behind walls of money, power, and influence. They thought no one below them mattered enough to notice, let alone fight back. But this janitor, this woman they had dismissed as invisible, was proving them wrong with nothing more than her voice. One woman at the far end of the table finally spoke, her voice sharp and defensive. "You have no right to accuse us without proof. You think you can just waltz in here and scare us with words?" The janitor's faint smile returned. "I don't need to scare you with words," she replied. She tapped the envelope again, slowly, firmly. "The proof is already here." A ripple of unease swept across the room. For the first time, the arrogance began to crack. Mr. Thompson leaned forward, his face flushed with anger, but his voice betrayed a hint of worry. "Do you know what happens if you try to accuse us? Do you know how quickly we can ruin you?" The janitor's eyes locked onto his, unwavering. "You've already tried," she said. "Years ago, when I spoke up about missing money in the budget, you silenced me. You pushed me out of accounting. You made sure I was given this uniform and this cart, hoping I would disappear. But instead I stayed. I waited. And I watched. While you thought I was cleaning your mess, I was collecting the truth about the mess you created." The shock was visible now. Several people at the table turned to look at Thompson, realizing for the first time that there might be a past between him and the janitor that none of them knew. Thompson's lips tightened. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked slightly. "That's nonsense. No one remembers you." "I don't need you to remember me," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "Because soon, the world will remember me for shutting you down." The words landed like a hammer. Some executives began to fidget, their arrogance slipping away. Others whispered nervously to each other. A few still tried to laugh, but it sounded hollow now, forced, fake. The janitor, standing tall in her simple, green uniform, had turned the room upside down. In just minutes, she had shifted the balance of power. The same people who mocked her now feared her, and she wasn't finished. The air in the room felt heavier now. The laughter that once bounced off the walls was gone. The executives sat stiffly in their leather chairs, their expensive suits suddenly feeling like a cage. Each of them stared at the brown envelope lying on the polished table as if it were a snake ready to strike. The janitor stood still, her arms folded. She didn't rush, didn't push. She knew the power of silence. She had spent years in silence, listening, watching, learning. Now that silence worked for her. It made them nervous. It forced them to wonder what was inside that envelope. Finally, one of the younger executives, a man named Daniel, broke the silence. His voice was softer than the others, almost uncertain. What exactly do you have there?" The janitor slowly placed both hands on the envelope and slid it forward. The sound of paper against wood seemed louder than the hum of the air conditioner. She looked directly at Daniel, then at the rest of the board. "This," she said firmly, "is the truth you've tried to bury for years." The words hit them like a hammer. Mr. Thompson's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, trying to sound confident, but his voice trembled slightly. "More nonsense. Lies from a bitter woman. She doesn't have anything." The janitor's calm eyes turned to him. "If I have nothing, why are you sweating, Mr. Thompson?" Gasps filled the room. A few heads turned toward him, and for the first time the powerful leader looked exposed. The janitor opened the envelope and pulled out the first set of documents. They were photocopies of emails, spreadsheets, and contracts. She laid them neatly on the table for all to see. "You thought no one noticed when millions disappeared from the workers' pension fund," she said, her voice steady. "But I noticed, and here are the numbers that prove it." The executives leaned forward despite themselves. Some tried to keep their expressions blank, but their eyes betrayed their fear. She pulled out another sheet. "You thought no one heard when deals were made behind closed doors, trading worker safety for profit. But I heard. I was cleaning the floor outside your office when you said, and I quote, 'Accidents happen, but lawsuits cost more than lives. The words echoed through the room. A few people turned pale. One woman covered her mouth with her hand, shocked. The janitor wasn't finished. She pulled out a third document, a report, stamped confidential. You thought no one would find out? About the factory collapse overseas. But I found out. Workers were left injured, families were left with nothing while you toasted champagne in this very building. Whispers spread across the table like fire. Some of the executives looked at each other with guilt, others with panic. You've been stealing, she continued. Not just money, but dignity. From every man and woman who trusted this company to care for them. You wear fine suits while others wear holes in their shoes. You eat banquets while children of your workers go to bed hungry. And you thought no one would ever speak up because you silenced anyone who tried. Her words were like arrows, each one striking deeper than the last. Richard, the finance director, slammed his fist on the table. This is outrageous. She's making things up. How could a janitor know any of this? The janitor looked at him, her expression calm. Because you left the evidence in the trash, and I picked it up. Silence again. Everyone stared at her, realizing the truth. She had been there all along, moving through their offices like a shadow, unnoticed. They had treated her as invisible, and invisibility had become her shield. Richard's face turned red. This is still worthless. No one will believe you. The janitor's lips curved into the faintest smile. She reached into her bag once more and pulled out a small flash drive. She held it up between her fingers, and its metallic shine caught the light. This, she said, is already with the press, with the union, with government officials. Every single piece of paper here has already been copied and sent. Even if you throw me out today, the world will know tomorrow. The room erupted. Executives shouted over each other, voices rising in panic. Some demanded answers from Thompson. Others whispered frantically about damage control. One man stood up, pacing, his face pale with fear. For the first time, the powerful leaders who thought they ruled the world looked like frightened children. Their arrogance was gone. Mr. Thompson tried to regain control. He stood, pointing at the janitor again. You think you can destroy us? Do you know who we are? Do you know the power we hold? The janitor met his anger with quiet strength. I know exactly who you are. That's why I stayed. That's why I watched. And that's why I collected everything you tried to hide. Her voice grew stronger, more certain. I may be a janitor, in your eyes, but today, I am the voice of every worker you've crushed, every family you've stolen from, every life you've treated like garbage, and that voice cannot be silenced anymore. The room fell into stunned silence. Some executives lowered their heads, shame written across their faces. Others stared blankly, their minds racing with fear of what was about to happen. The empire they built on lies and greed was crumbling, and it was collapsing at the hands of the very woman they had mocked. The janitor slowly gathered her papers, slid them back into the envelope, and placed the flash drive in her pocket. She didn't need to stay any longer. Her job here was done, but before leaving, she turned once more to the table of shaken leaders. You laughed when I walked in, she said quietly. But the only ones laughing now are the workers outside this building who will finally see justice. With that, she picked up her cart and began pushing it toward the door. Her steps were calm, steady, unshaken. The executives sat frozen, powerless, watching the woman they had once dismissed as invisible walk out with more strength and dignity than all of them combined. And though she left the room, her presence remained like a shadow. The revelation had been made. The truth was out. And nothing could stop what was coming next. The meeting room, once filled with arrogant laughter and confident voices, now sat in stunned silence. The janitor's footsteps echoed as she pushed her cart toward the door, but the weight of her words lingered behind. The executives who once believed themselves untouchable were now pale, trembling, their power slipping through their fingers like sand. Mr. Thompson's face was red, his jaw clenched so tight it looked as though it might break. He pounded his fist against the table, trying to recapture control. Everyone calm down, he barked, his voice cracking. "We can fix this, she's bluffing, there's no way she sent those files anywhere." But no one believed him anymore. His once commanding presence had shrunk. He was no longer the towering leader they feared. He was just a desperate man watching. His empire collapse. Richard, the finance director, leaned in close to Thompson. His voice was low but urgent. "What if she's telling the truth? If the union or the press gets their hands on this, we're finished. Not just you, all of us." Panic spread around the table like a virus. The executives whispered in frantic voices. A woman shook her head, muttering, "We could lose everything. Our careers, our homes, our reputations." Another rubbed his temples, whispering about prison. Thompson slammed his hand down again. "Stop panicking. We'll call the lawyers. We'll bury her in lawsuits. We'll say she forged the documents." But even as he spoke, his voice betrayed him. His eyes darted nervously toward the door the janitor had exited through, as if fearing she was listening still. Daniel, the younger executive who had spoken up earlier, leaned forward. His voice was quiet but firm. "You don't get it, do you? She doesn't need to be in this room anymore. If she's already sent the evidence, then it's out of our hands. We can't stop it." The words struck the table harder than any fist. For the first time, the board members realized the truth. Their walls of wealth and influence could not protect them anymore. The janitor had cut through everything with proof, cold, undeniable proof. One executive stood suddenly, pushing back his chair. "I won't go down with the rest of you," he snapped. "If investigators come, I'll tell them everything. I won't cover for anyone." The room erupted again. Accusations flew like daggers. Voices overlapped, each louder than the other. "You signed those contracts. You approved those cuts. This was your idea, not mine. You made us agree. Don't you dare blame me." The unity they once had was gone. They turned on each other, clawing for survival, each one desperate to save themselves. In the corner of the room, Daniel sat quietly, watching the chaos. He had joined the company with dreams of making a difference, but over time, he had been forced into silence. Now he realized that silence had made him part of the machine. And it took a janitor, a woman they had all dismissed, to break it. Meanwhile, across the city, the first signs of the storm appeared. A journalist received an anonymous email with attachments labeled "Confidential." Union leaders gathered, their eyes widening as they read the files. Workers whispered in hallways, messages spreading like wildfire. The truth is out. Back in the meeting room, the executives' phones began to buzz. Notifications flashed across screens. News outlets were already picking up the story. Headlines screamed, "Whistleblower exposes corruption at top corporation. Millions stolen from workers' funds." Executives face investigation after shocking revelations. One woman clutched her phone, her hand shaking. "It's already on the news," she whispered. Her voice broke. "It's everywhere." The eye. Color drained from faces around the table. Some sat in shock, staring blankly at the floor. Others argued louder, panic consuming them. Mr. Thompson stood again, his voice desperate now, stripped of all authority. "We can still fight this, do you hear me? We still have power, money, connections, we can make this go away." But no one listened. His words fell flat. The fall had begun. Within hours, government investigators arrived at the company's headquarters. Reporters gathered outside, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Workers who had once felt powerless stood in clusters, watching with a mix of awe and relief as the mighty leaders were questioned, escorted, and eventually removed. Inside, the once grand meeting room became a scene of defeat. Executives who had strutted with pride now hunched in their chairs, whispering to lawyers, their hands trembling. The arrogance that once filled the air was gone, replaced by fear and shame. And though the janitor wasn't there to see it, her presence was everywhere. Every whispered accusation, every pale face, every crumbling ego. It all pointed back to the moment she laid that envelope on the table. The fall of giants didn't come from a rival corporation or a powerful competitor. It came from a woman they never saw coming, a woman they had laughed at, mocked, and dismissed. The janitor had turned their empire upside down with nothing but truth, courage, and patience. Outside, workers cheered as news spread that investigations were underway. Some cried tears of joy, others shouted words of thanks. For the first time in years, they felt hope. For the first time, they believed justice was possible. And in a small break room on the lower floor, the janitor quietly poured herself a cup of coffee. She didn't smile, she didn't boast. She simply sat down, her hands wrapped around the warm mug, and let out a long breath. She had done what she came to do. The fall of giants had begun, not with violence, not with revenge, but with truth. The key. Storm had passed, but its echo remained. Days after the janitor walked into that boardroom, the city still buzzed with her story. Newspapers carried her face on the front page, not in her green uniform, but in black and white photos, snapped by curious workers when she walked through the lobby that day. News anchors called her the whistleblower who shook the empire. Social media spread her name with awe, and workers across industries began whispering her story as if it were legend. But inside the company's halls, things looked different now. The once polished offices felt quieter, stripped of arrogance. Executives were gone, their chairs empty, their titles meaningless. Lawyers came and went, but they could not erase the truth. The company, once seen as untouchable, now stood on shaky ground. And in the center of it all, the janitor continued her work. She still pushed her cart, still mopped the same floors, still wore the same uniform. But there was something different now. Not in her, but in how others looked at her. When she entered a room, people stood a little straighter. When she passed in the hallway, workers nodded with respect. No one laughed anymore. No one dismissed her. She had become a symbol of courage, a living reminder that dignity and truth held more power than money and titles. One morning, as she polished the lobby floor, a group of young employees approached her. They looked nervous at first, but one of them finally spoke. "Ma'am," he said softly, "we just wanted to thank you. If it weren't for you, we'd still be suffering under their lies. You gave us hope again." The janitor smiled faintly, wiping her hands on a rag. "I didn't do this alone," she replied. "The truth was always here. I just made sure it was heard." Her words spread among the workers like fire. People began calling her the guardian of truth. Some brought her flowers, others offered to carry her cart. But she never let the attention change her. She remained the same, quiet, steady, humble. Meanwhile, outside the company, her story inspired others. Workers in other industries began questioning corruption in their own offices. Unions found strength in her courage. Journalists cited her as proof that ordinary people could make extraordinary change. But not everyone admired her. Some of the fallen executives tried to smear her name, calling her bitter, vengeful, or a liar. They claimed she wanted fame, that she had faked the evidence. Yet their words carried no weight anymore. The truth was too strong, and the people had seen her courage with their own eyes. In time, investigations led to arrests. Thompson, Richard, and others who once laughed at her found themselves in court, their suits traded for prison uniforms. The sight of them humbled, heads bowed, was broadcast on every screen in the city. And every time the footage played, people remembered the janitor who had walked into their boardroom and shut them down with nothing but truth. One afternoon, the janitor was called into a gathering in the company auditorium. She didn't know why she had been summoned. She expected perhaps a meeting about cleaning schedules. Instead, when she walked in, she found hundreds of workers standing and applauding. The applause grew louder, echoing off the walls. Some people had tears in their eyes. Others shouted her name. For the first time, the woman who had lived invisible in the shadows stood at the center of attention. A young worker stepped forward, holding a plaque. His voice shook as he spoke. "This is for you, for your courage, for proving that no matter how small the world makes us feel, one voice can still bring down giants." The janitor accepted the plaque, her hands trembling slightly. She looked out at the sea of faces, faces of people she had cleaned up after, people who once walked past, her without a glance, and now every eye in the room was on her with respect. She took a deep breath and spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I don't want to be remembered as the woman who brought men down," she said. "I want to be remembered as the woman who reminded everyone that truth always wins. Don't ever think your voice is too small. Don't ever think your job makes you invisible. You matter. Your dignity matters. And when you choose to stand for what's right, the world cannot ignore you." The room erupted in applause again, louder than before. Some workers cried openly, their tears a mix of relief and pride. Others hugged each other, inspired by her words. From that day on, her story became part of the company's history. Her name was spoken with reverence, not pity. And though she continued to mop floors and push her cart, everyone knew she carried something far greater than cleaning supplies. She carried the weight of justice, the power of truth, and the respect of all who had once overlooked her. In time, she retired quietly without ceremony, but her story lived on. Workers told it to new employees, parents told it to their children, and journalists still referred to her as the janitor who cleaned more than floors. She cleaned corruption. And in the city's memory, she remained immortal, not because of wealth, not because of titles, but because she proved something timeless. Respect is not given by a uniform, a title, or a salary. Respect is earned by courage, by truth, and by the strength to stand tall when the world laughs at you. The old janitor had entered a boardroom where they mocked her existence. She walked out as a legend who shut the company down instantly, and that legacy could never be erased.